Welcome to RPG PhD. I'm Dr. Ben, and today we're diving into the art and science of designing game mechanics for tabletop role-playing games. Creating and adapting mechanics isn't just about resolving actions, it's about crafting the very foundation that shapes a game's rhythm, tone, and emotional impact. Well-designed mechanics can elevate storytelling, boost player engagement, and transform the game experience in powerful ways. In this video, we'll explore techniques for inventing new mechanics, adapting existing ones, and applying a design process model that helps us experiment, test, and refine systems for the best gameplay possible. Let's get started. At the heart of tabletop RPG design lies the crafting of mechanics that resonate with the game's themes and facilitate an immersive experience. New mechanics are often inspired by the core narrative, themes, or desired emotional responses within the game. In horror role-playing games, mechanics that simulate dread, unpredictability, and powerlessness, such as sanity meters in Call of Cthulhu, support the genre by making fear an active and personal part of the player's experience. Sanity points, which deplete as characters encounter eldritch horrors, add a layer of tension as players must weigh each interaction, knowing it could drive their character to madness. Resolution mechanics lie at the heart of role-playing games, shaping how players interact with the world, each other, and the very nature of chance and fate. These mechanics resolve character actions, mediate conflict outcomes, and guide the flow of the narrative. While traditional games often rely on dice rolls to determine success or failure, exploring new or adapted resolution mechanics, whether using dice, cards, coins, or custom tools, can add a dynamic thematic layer to gameplay. A helpful technique in creating new mechanics is the theme-mechanic alignment approach. Here, designers identify the game's core themes and build mechanics that evoke these themes. Suppose the goal is to create a mechanic for a heist-based RPG that emphasizes precision and risk. In this case, a clock-based mechanic might be fitting, where each player action feels a danger clock. If the clock fills up, guards become aware, increasing tension. This mechanic creates a natural sense of suspense as players see the clock advance with each decision, embodying the heist's time-sensitive, risky nature. A resolution mechanic's primary purpose is to mediate the actions and outcomes within a game's world. However, the choice of resolution mechanics should go beyond mere functionality. It should reflect the game's thematic goals and the experiences it seeks to evoke. A high fantasy game might use heroic, open-ended mechanics to reinforce epic feats and high stakes, whereas a gritty survival game could use low probability systems to underscore difficulty and scarcity. Before selecting or designing a resolution mechanic, designers should consider what the system needs to accomplish. Is it meant to simulate randomness, reward skillful choices, or control narrative pacing? A game focused on combat tactics might benefit from a system where player skill significantly affects outcomes, while a horror-themed game might rely on randomness and uncertainty to heighten the tension. The mechanics should reflect the tone and style of the game. Consider using a system that reinforces the setting and the psychological state you want to evoke. Horror games, for instance, might feature mechanics that limit player control to enhance feelings of helplessness, while light-hearted, story-driven games might use more flexible, low-stakes systems to keep the game flowing. In a horror RPG, players might use a Jenga tower as the resolution mechanic. Each action requires pulling a block, and as the tower becomes less stable, the threat of failure and potential character death looms larger. The physical act of pulling a block adds to the atmosphere of suspense and dread, aligning perfectly with the horror genre. Each type of resolution mechanic brings distinct advantages and challenges, making certain types more suitable for specific game styles and objectives. Dice are among the most common resolution tools due to their versatility and familiarity. Dice systems vary widely. Percentile dice, single dice rolls, dice pools, and exploding dice are just a few variations. Dice also lend themselves to adaptation, such as adding modifiers based on character stats or circumstances. In D&D, the D20 system is fundamental. Players roll a 20-sided die to determine success, adding modifiers based on skills or abilities. This system works well for high fantasy as it allows for dramatic successes, rolling a natural 20, or critical failures, rolling a 1. All of this aligns with the game's heroic tone. For dice-based systems, consider the balance between randomness and skill. A single D20 roll has high variability, while a dice pool system like Shadowrun allows for more predictable outcomes based on skill and attribute levels, which might actually suit a tactical or gritty setting better. Cards offer unique advantages such as memory, progression, and limited outcomes. In card-based systems, players might draw from a standard deck or custom cards that determine success or failure. This method allows for interesting modifications such as deck stacking or shuffling based on story events, creating a more controlled randomness than dice. Players might draw from a deck of cards, each illustrating a symbolic image. The GM interprets the card's meaning within the context of the player's action, making resolution an interpretive act rather than purely mechanical. This system fits well with a game that's mythic and has a narrative focus, allowing outcomes to feel mystical and fate-driven. Card mechanics work well for games with a narrative focus, where story elements or thematic interpretations enhance immersion. Deck modification mechanics, such as adding or removing cards, can symbolize shifts in fortune or destiny, adding a deeper layer of storytelling. Coins or binary systems, such as flipping a coin, are generally used for simple, high-stakes decisions where only two possible outcomes are needed. This system is inherently limited as it lacks complexity, but it can add tension when used sparingly. Players might occasionally need to make a shadow check to determine if their dark side takes over. This might involve a binary system like flipping a coin with the shadow taking control on tails. This might align well if the game is psychological horror, creating a constant ominous sense of losing control. Binary systems are best for moments of pure chance or as a supplement to more complex mechanics. They work especially well in high-tension moments where simple, dramatic outcomes are thematically appropriate. Hybrid systems incorporate multiple resolution tools or use non-standard objects like tokens, bidding systems, or role-specific mechanics that add unique gameplay layers. Hybrid approaches allow designers to tailor mechanics to specific game themes and can create unique play experiences. So, for example, players might use a combination of candlelight and dice. As the game progresses, candles are extinguished, limiting light and dice rolls. When the final candle goes out, the game ends and all characters are assumed to meet their tragic fate. This hybrid system aligns powerfully with the themes of dread and impending doom. Hybrid systems allow for creativity, but they can increase complexity and require careful balance. They work best in games where unique player experiences are central to immersion and where the mechanic reflects essential story or thematic elements. Borrowing or adapting mechanics from established games can be a highly effective design strategy, provided they are modified thoughtfully. To adapt a mechanic successfully, a designer must understand the original purpose and limitations of the mechanic in its native context and assess its compatibility with the new game. Consider the adaptation of combat systems from traditional fantasy RPGs to social conflict mechanics in intrigue-heavy games. D&D, for instance, employs turn-based combat where initiative, hit points, and attack rolls create structured tactical encounters. However, these mechanics can be reinterpreted for social settings by replacing hit points with credibility points, initiative with conversation turns, and attack rolls with persuasion or influence checks. In a political intrigue game, a successful attack might involve gaining leverage over an NPC, creating stakes without physical violence, but preserving the dramatic tension of a typical combat sequence. Another approach is to examine mechanics with a dual function and modify them to emphasize one aspect over another. In Apocalypse World games, the moves system allows players to take actions with predictable yet narratively flexible results. By tweaking the language and consequences of certain moves, turning a go aggro move into a command influence for a political RPG, the same structure becomes an engaging way to navigate. Designing game mechanics for tabletop role-playing games is a blend of art science and empathetic storytelling. At its core, the process revolves around constructing systems that empower players to interact with the game world in meaningful ways, evoking emotions and fostering creativity. Designing new mechanics or adapting existing ones requires a deep understanding of player experience, as well as a willingness to experiment and refine based on iterative feedback. Creating new mechanics for tabletop role-playing games begins with identifying an aspect of gameplay or player behavior that a designer wishes to emphasize or alter. A designer might want to create a system for managing character relationships, a mechanic often unexplored in traditional RPGs. By focusing on this aim, the designer can start with questions. How can the game encourage players to invest in each other's characters? What incentives or consequences can drive meaningful choices in these relationships? One way to develop new mechanics is through the inspiration-driven approach, where designers look to other games, media, or real-world experiences for ideas. Blades in the Dark uses a stress mechanic, where characters can push themselves beyond their limits at a cost. This design is inspired by heist and noir genres where characters are always one bad decision away from disaster. Translating a concept into mechanics often means developing a central mechanic that embodies the theme and then attaching related subsystems to it. In the case of a relationship mechanic, designers could experiment with creating a bond system where players gain points with each other based on shared experiences or sacrifices made, which can later unlock narrative rewards or boost abilities when fighting together. After generating an initial concept, playtesting becomes the next critical step. Here, the design process model, often used in game design, proves invaluable. This model involves 4 stages: ideation, prototyping, testing, and refinement. During prototyping, the designer translates the concept into actionable rules and determines how it fits into the existing system. Testing involves running the mechanic through several gameplay sessions, ideally with different groups, to gather feedback on its functionality, balance, and contribution to the game's overall feel. The key here is to observe where players become invested, where the mechanic disrupts flow, and how it affects engagement. If players are consistently strategizing around bonds to maximize benefits, this is a sign that the mechanic successfully taps into player motivation. Adapting an existing mechanic allows designers to utilize tried and true frameworks while adding new elements to suit a unique context. This approach is particularly effective in settings where players have a shared understanding of certain mechanics, such as the D20 system in D&D. Instead of creating an entirely new combat system, a designer could add a fate die mechanic, which players can roll to affect outcomes based on fate or luck. This keeps the familiar structure of the D20 roll while adding an element of unpredictability, making players feel as though their actions carry additional weight. A well-adapted mechanic should feel fresh yet intuitive, providing new experiences without overwhelming players with complex rule changes. The adaptation process can also benefit from the design model process. In this context, ideation and testing phases involve understanding how the new mechanic will function within the existing system. Designers may seek feedback specifically on how intuitive the adapted mechanic feels and whether it integrates smoothly into the existing framework. Refinement might involve making subtle adjustments to ensure that the adapted mechanic is balanced and serves its thematic purpose without overpowering or trivializing other game elements. Once a mechanic is designed or adapted, effectively implementing it in gameplay requires intentionality. Mechanics are not simply tools for resolving actions, they shape player behavior, influencing the atmosphere and pacing of the game. The stress mechanic in Blades of the Dark affects how players approach heists, making them more cautious, desperate, or willing to take risks. Effective utilization means encouraging players to engage with the mechanic as a natural part of the game world. To achieve this, mechanics should be introduced with clarity and narrative integration in mind. For instance, if introducing a mechanic like prayer for divine intervention in a game, it might be wise to weave it into the setting. Perhaps divine intervention is rare but observable in small miracles, which primes players to understand that a prayer is not guaranteed to yield results, but has the potential to be powerful. The prayer mechanic, which has a, let's say, small 5% chance or less of success, is rolled behind the screen, creating a balance between suspense and fairness. Players know it's an option, but do not rely on it excessively, preserving its role as a desperate measure rather than a fallback strategy. An effective mechanic also requires reinforcement. This can be accomplished through narrative cues, rewards, or consequences that prompt players to use the mechanic creatively. In games with social mechanics, the GM can remind players to consider interpersonal bonds when strategizing or making sacrifices. Reinforcing the mechanic's relevance through NPC interactions or in-game events ensures that players are constantly reminded of its value and impact on the story. Over time, players come to view the mechanic as an essential component of their decision-making process. Mechanic design, whether creating new or adapting existing ones, is inherently an iterative process. After initial playtest, the refinement stage often reveals new insights, leading designers to tweak values, clarify rules, or alter the mechanic's consequences. If a mechanic initially required players to track multiple resources and feedback indicates it slowed down gameplay, designers might reduce the resource types or introduce a streamlined tracking system. A useful approach is to employ structured playtesting where each session focuses on a particular aspect of the mechanic, balance, intuitiveness, or impact on immersion. In the early testing of the aforementioned bond system, structured playtests might examine how often players use bonds, whether the system incentivizes meaningful choices, and whether the narrative rewards feel proportionate. Gathering feedback on these aspects separately allows designers to make targeted refinements, which can then test in subsequent sessions. As mechanics evolve, they may take on a life of their own, diverging from the initial concept in unexpected ways. Embracing these changes leads to mechanics that feel organic and responsive to player behavior, ultimately enhancing the game's richness. Mechanics that have undergone iterative refinement are likely to feel polished, balanced, and cohesive within the larger game framework, leading to a more seamless and enjoyable experience for players. A well-designed mechanic encourages players to interact with the world in nuanced ways, adding depth to both individual character arcs and the shared story. For resolution mechanics to be effective, they must suit the style and focus of a game. A mismatch between mechanics and game tone can create dissonance, pulling players out of the experience. Ensuring alignment between mechanics and narrative style will elevate immersion and player investment. Creating a new RPG mechanic involves a structured process that helps bring clarity, coherence, and functionality to an idea. Here's a step-by-step guide to developing a new mechanic from the initial concept through to finalization, using an example mechanic called Mystic Resilience to illustrate each stage. Step 1. Identify the purpose and goal of the mechanic. Define the core intent. Start by asking, what should this mechanic achieve? Think about the gameplay experience or theme you want to emphasize. For example, do you want to give players a sense of resilience or magical resistance? Clarity at this stage will guide all subsequent decisions. The Mystic Resilience mechanic is intended to add tension and strategy to battles by allowing characters to resist some magical effects. The mechanic's goal is to give characters a way to manage their exposure to dangerous spells without making them immune, thus introducing more tactical depth. Analyze its impact on gameplay. Think about how this mechanic will integrate with other systems. Will it add complexity, encourage certain behaviors, or balance other mechanics? Consider what type of decisions you want it to drive. Mystic Resilience should impact players' choices when confronting spellcasters. They'll have to decide when to use their resilience, knowing it might deplete quickly in a prolonged encounter. The mechanic should make players consider which spells are critical to resist and when to conserve their resilience. Step 2. Choose the mechanic's core system. Select a resolution system. Decide on a system that aligns with the mechanic's purpose. This could be a dice roll, point tracking, or a narrative decision. The system should be intuitive yet flexible enough to allow creative use. For Mystic Resilience, let's choose a point-based system where characters have a limited number of resilience points. Each time they attempt to resist a magical effect, they spend a point, giving them a chance to nullify or lessen the impact. Establish the parameters. Define the conditions, thresholds, and scales. Determine what actions activate the mechanic and how those actions are quantified or categorized. Characters have a fixed pool of resilience points that resets only after an extended rest, or maybe only once per day. Spending a point allows them to roll a d20 against the spell's difficulty. A success roll reduces the spell's effect by half, while failure means the spell hits normally. This way, the mechanic offers risk and reward without trivializing magic. Step 3. Create a prototype and basic rules. Draft initial rules. Develop a clear, concise set of rules. Consider how players will engage with the mechanic and outline any adjustments to other game systems. Write the rules in a simple format to make them easy to understand. The Mythic Resilience mechanic could have the following rules. Each character has 3 resilience points. Spending a point allows the character to roll against a spell's difficulty. On a successful roll, the spell's effect is halved. On a failure, the character takes the full impact. Resilience points are replenished only after a full rest. Create a prototype or playtest document. Build a basic prototype to test this mechanic. This could be a section added to the character sheets or a token system to track points. Having something tangible helps players understand and engage with the mechanic during playtests. You could add a Mystic Resilience box on character sheets where players can mark or erase points as they use them. You can outline the mechanic's rules and add example spell difficulties for reference. And then you may want to conduct some playtesting. You can organize playtesting sessions. You can do this with different groups or your normal group. Ideally, a mix of experienced and new players. You can observe player interactions with the mechanic and note how it influences their decision making. Gather feedback. After each session, ask players for their thoughts on clarity, engagement, and any confusion. Was the mechanic easy to remember and use? Did it enhance the gameplay? Or did it complicate combat unnecessarily? Then you just analyze your data and make adjustments. Look for patterns in player feedback to identify areas needing improvement. Return to your original purpose. Is the mechanic achieving its intended goal? Then you adjust rules or parameters based on the feedback. If players feel that Resilience points are too few to have a significant impact. Consider increasing the starting points or adding ways to regain points between encounters. If the d20 roll seems too unpredictable, you might switch to a smaller die range for more consistent outcomes. Step 5. Refine the mechanic. Iterate based on feedback. Refine the mechanic with insights from playtesting. Adjust parameters, thresholds, or specific rules as needed. Repeat playtesting with the revised version to see if changes improve gameplay. Optimize clarity and usability. Rewrite the mechanics rules for clarity, aiming to keep the wording simple and intuitive. Ensure players can reference and apply the mechanic without interrupting gameplay flow. Simplify the Mystic Resilience rules by stating, when spending a resilience point, roll a d10. On a roll of 7 or higher, reduce the spell's effect by half. This adjustment keeps the mechanic straightforward and easy to reference. Step 6. Integrate and finalize. Integrate the mechanic into the game system. Make sure the new mechanic fits smoothly with other systems, test for balance with other mechanics, and confirm that it complements rather than disrupts the flow of play. Create supporting material. Design additional resources like reference charts or examples to help players understand the mechanic, especially if it's complicated. You could also create a frequently asked questions or a list of common questions to address potential issues. Finalize and document the mechanic. Write up the final version of the mechanic in your rulebook or as a supplementary sheet. Include examples, tips, and optional rules if needed to help both players and game masters implement it smoothly. In the final documentation, include examples of how Mystic Resilience works with different spell difficulties, provide tips for when to use resilience points effectively, and offer a rule variation where resilience points recharge partially after a short rest or for added flexibility, for example. The structured process of defining goals, creating prototypes, gathering feedback, and iterating on the design ensures the mechanic is polished, balanced, and aligned with the game's core themes. Through careful testing and thoughtful refinement, mechanics like Mystic Resilience can become meaningful parts of the game, enriching both player interaction and the story itself. Thanks for joining me here on RPG PhD. I hope this dive into designing game mechanics sparks some new ideas for your own games. Remember, whether you're creating something entirely new or adapting a tried and true system, a thoughtful approach can make all the difference. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe for more content that brings your RPG experience to the next level. And as always, drop your questions and thoughts in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear how you're building and refining your own mechanics. Until next time, keep imagining, improvising, and immersing yourself in tabletop role-playing games. Thanks for watching. See you next time.